Welcome to Future Customer Value, where global leaders share their career-defining customer moments. On episode 5, we are excited to feature Haydar Al-Saad, founder of RevSetter based out of Santa Monica. Haydar, great to see you again. It's awesome to have you on the show and looking forward to having the conversation with you about the future of CS, a lot of your great experiences over the past few years. And before we kick things off, would love for you to introduce yourself to our audience, what you are up to now and what experiences led up to that.
Awesome. Hi, Sagar. Great to see you again as well. And yeah, excited for this conversation and after some of the ones I've had before. So my name is Haydar Al-Saad. So I run a company called RevSetter. I'm the CEO and founder of that company. It's a modern kind of customer success platform with a big focus on driving revenue within the customer base. So we're tailored and built for both CSMs, but also account managers and the revenue flow that you have around the customers. And kind of the reason why I started the company years ago is I spent the last 10, 15 years prior to that in CS and executive roles at Meltwater as advising other companies and kind of really running that commercial side of things with a heavy focus on the post-sale side with CS and account management. So I've been in this space for a long time, a buyer, user of all things customer and CS software over the years, and it led me to RevSetter, and here we are today work-wise. And I'm based in LA, so I live here with my wife and 3 kids now. So 3 kids between the ages of 5 and 4 months. So they keep me busy as well outside of work, running around all day.
Got it. That's great. Big family, and love to see that you are able to balance that and the entrepreneurial journey. And I'm sure that's can be challenging at times.
I be good with not too much sleep every day, but
a lot of things to keep you up at night, right? When people ask me that question, like, "Oh, my kids."
100%. But yeah, you find the balance, especially when you love what you're doing on both ends of it. So it makes it easier.
Love it. Awesome. Well, I'd love to kick off with a story that you told me in our pre episode chat here, and I thought it was super fascinating because you're talking about your time at Meltwater. And Meltwater, for those who don't know, is a massive enterprise organization. It wasn't always that way, but it grew into being a really world-class post-sales organization. And I'm curious, you talked about as the company grew, there were challenges that came up with the company getting more segmented in post-sales, maybe different roles for different business units and different tiers. But as the company got more segmented, collaboration became a challenge because now you have a lot more bureaucracy, maybe politics. So I would love to hear you talk about that and what were your learnings? I mean, tell us about what happened, give us the story, and then talk to us about the learnings. What did you take away from that experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so I was at Meltwater for a long time, 10 years, and saw the organization grow, which a lot of businesses out there and companies are going through that same journey right now, have been over the last several years, from a smaller startup growth stage company to a very big organization globally. And in that transition for Meltwater and the company, the customer base also obviously grew a lot during those years, and the size and scope of the supporting organization for the customers, meaning customer success, account management, support, grew with it as well. So whereas the company initially had a customer base that was fairly flat, you had a CS organizations with CSMs managing the customers and doing everything every day. Over time, because of the size of the organization, we had to restructure and reshift how we work with the customers. And I was doing a lot of that, running the CS organization for the Americas and being a part of the global CX organization as well. And a big part of what we had to do is first we had to start segmenting the customers, going to segmentations within the customer base, SMB, mid-market, enterprise, and the different use cases. And then built around that, we had to create the teams that would support that organization. So that's where CSMs became CSMs and kind of account management, where account management was focused on the expansion and the revenue driving piece of the business, and CS on more of the value driving day-to-day organization and kind of teeing up towards the renewal. And then you also had support and consultations, some additional kind of supporting roles. But that created a lot of interesting interactions and created a lot of bottlenecks, because now you go from one person that feels I own the customer and what happens with the customer, how we're interacting with them, how much we're pushing to sell additional products or make sure they're happy with what they have or supporting them. to now being multiple people with different responsibilities around the customer, and how do you handle that internally, as well as how do you handle that towards the customer from a company perspective, so the customer also doesn't feel overwhelmed or being kind of quote unquote attacked from many different places about many different things. So that was an interesting challenge that naturally happens as you grow and you need to start creating a structure around how you work. But it creates a lot of interesting dynamics, collaboration, especially at scale. When you have 3, 5, 10, 15, 20 people, that's easy. The organization that I was running, you had 200 plus people in post sales. So with that, many teams in different regions and different roles and different segments, and now you get to a lot of those situations where you're trying to figure out how do you best collaborate, how do you create methodologies and structures that enables teams to hit the goals that they need to hit from a internal revenue perspective, retention, growth, renewal rate, all that stuff, but also giving the customer a really good experience and making sure they don't feel that the change is to push internal metrics and KPIs, but also one that will help them be more successful as a customer of the company. So that whole process was very interesting. A lot of questions came out of it as well.
For sure. I think the evolution of one monolith customer success organization that breaks into segments makes a lot of sense as the organization evolves. But to your point, it can create frictions. I remember when I was at a prior firm, we were selling a Salesforce competitor. So high dollar software, long sales cycles, complex products. And I was in customer success when we were one team. We broke that into account management. And now you have these two functions, the revenue engine, which was account management, and the happiness engine, which was customer success. And that's a term that a previous podcast guest, Damian Howley, talks a lot about in his book, Control Your Customer. But it's really fascinating that you have to break these two things out: happiness, adoption, success, revenue. Maybe there's other roles as well, but I think that inherently can create a friction because you don't know who's really owning the account, who's owning that relationship, and who gets paid, right? Who gets paid for owning it and driving results. So talk to me a bit about that piece. What frictions came out from that structure, and was it valid, or was that is that inherent to that structure, or are there ways to have that structure and it still be smooth?
Yeah, no, I think it definitely came out of that structure, but also one that any structure where you have mixed responsibilities around one entity, which in this case is the customer, you'll essentially create some friction in that. Now, I think you asked a very interesting question and a very relevant one because it came up a lot, which is who owns the customer? The CS person was like, no, I own the customer. I need to make sure they're happy, so they renew. And I've owned this relationship before, whereas the account manager comes in and says, well, I have a upsell target. I have a quota that I need to hit as well. I need to sell to a customer. Who owns it? And the answer that I found and I gave a lot, which was I think the right answer is, you don't own the customer and you don't own the customer. Actually, Meltwater in that example, as a company, owns the customer. You are working with different responsibilities towards that customer, and you need to collaborate to do that effectively so the customer gets what they need and they can be successful. But there's no individual that actually owns the customer. It's the company that owns the customer. And if you have that initial vantage point, then kind of both sides take a step back and say, okay, all right, this is the company's customer. You're tasked to work with them in different ways. And then when you have that initial state, then now it's easier to say, okay, let's make sure you guys are more aligned. So for example, we ensure that both CSMs and account management were also measured on net retention, because they can both impact that through renewals and happiness, as well as through upselling and cross-selling and driving growth in the company. And then we ensured that they were, sitting close to each other, work together. So because it's always harder to kind of do the wrong thing when you know the person, right? And if you and I, it's like our collaborating on a team, we'll do the right thing by each other as well, because we're on that team together and we're sitting close together. So that was another thing that we did outside compensation, is to make sure that they rolled up the same leader at the top. So there's one voice for that entire organization, even though they were split up and they had different middle management and director level people, but the ultimate leader was the same person. And that way you got alignment in terms of the communication, in terms of the messaging, and then adding some elements to both compensation models that can also align the team around what they need to get done.
Totally. That is a great, I've never heard that before. The company owns the account, and makes total sense. That's That's the best way to structure it to create equality across the teams. Did you have a situation at Meltwater where you had additional teams? I'm thinking about managed services, so professional services that were paid. You would have support, you would have technical, the SE type of roles in post sales, operations, who all could potentially touch the customer. Did you
Yeah.
have that there, or was it pure play AM and CS?
No, so we had there was a centralized support team for tickets and the customer could reach out to as well. We had for enterprise customers, there were enterprise services and consulting kind of services available as well, and some different implementation specialists, onboarders at one point. So there's a lot of different roles available, and I think that what we found there, and I've seen this also in a lot of other companies that I advise or work with today, is the most important thing is, one is you have a very clear internal description and understanding of who's responsible for what. When do you proactively touch the customer versus when does the customer reactively reach out to you and about what? So that was very understood in terms of support. That was the reactive function, right? We directed customers, hey, support issues, small problems, use the in-app support, send a ticket, etc., and they'll reach out and take care of that with you. The CSM, the account manager, always in CC, always available there, understanding what's happening with the customer. But we wanted the CS team and the account manager to be much more proactive. So they were kind of the quote unquote outward face to the customer, and kind of control that flow in terms of bringing in paid services or support in certain instances and make sure everything was running smoothly. And from the customer perspective, that was just as important to clearly define who is your team and who do you reach out to what and who's going to reach out to you about what. So they understood this is what the CSM is going to help me with. That's my day-to-day contact. That's the person I do trains with that's going to advise me and help me. The account manager will come in more strategically on a higher level, additional services, look at my overall solution, how is that fitting along. But being super clear with the customer created a sense for them of, when we went from one to many people, instead of it becoming, now I have a lot of people reaching out to me as a customer and it gets annoying for them. Instead it became, oh wow, I'm just getting a lot more resources from the company. I'm getting more attention and more access, which is a much more positive feeling, but you need to communicate that very properly.
Totally. Let me take you another offshoot route here is we have the pendulum swinging right now of enterprise, upscale, upmarket CS, high touch, human being centric. And then you got the tech touch, low touch, digital CM world that's also rearing its head. In a world with Meltwater, where you have maybe 6 different organizations touching a customer, 3 reactive, 2 proactive, or whatever the mix is, where do you see the bifurcation between tech touch, getting involved with the customer, and then what's left for the AM and CS to own?
Yeah, for sure. No, I think, about what this is, I started 10, 15 years ago and spent 10 years there. But I see that more and more today. And especially at RevSetter, we see this with customers that we work with. And I see that with the companies I advise. It is an interesting thing because when we think about tech touch and high touch, I think a lot of people associate, as you were describing it, we do high touch on the enterprise, high value customers. We do tech touch on the lower paying customers. And in general, that is correct. But the way to effectively implement that combination of tech and human touch is actually understanding the journey for each segment that you have, right? The enterprise journey is different than the journey of the customers. And you can actually incorporate tech in both of those journeys, and you can incorporate human touch in both. So as an example, when we had our, quote unquote SMB, smaller customers, they had a lot more tech touch, but the important pieces in that journey, which was around the renewal time and around expansion, that was done by humans, enabled by some tech and some kind of identification of different things, campaigns and whatnot. But the humans came in specific moments with even those smaller customers to ensure critical things happen. When it came to the bigger accounts, excuse me, the human touch happened and more through the journey, a lot more in the beginning in particular, a lot of tech touch in the middle of that journey, and then kind of from the middle on towards the tail end of that journey, the human touch came into play a lot more. So I would say you, as a company, when you think about digital versus non-digital CS, the instance that you think about is here I need to do a lot of tech touch at the top, high touch at the top and tech touch at the bottom, but actually look at those two journeys and understand what happens with the customer and what are critical points. And then you incorporate, where can I incorporate tech here to make that process a lot more effective? And where do I need human touch to make sure that we're executing on the big goals that we do have still?
Gotcha. I tend to agree with that. I think we have this vision in CS where you need to bifurcate by ACV or tier. This is only tech, this is only human. But the reality is that you can incorporate both in both areas, but you need to figure out what are the low value, high frequency motions or actions that you don't need a human for. And then that's independent of the ACV. So I take that point. I think a lot of folks will resonate with that.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's a specific example that we came across a lot, that's where I see a lot with us as well today at RevSetter. If you have a larger account, typically there's, 50, 100, maybe 1,000 different users leveraging your platform. When usage, and this is, how we have our customers from this perspective at RevSetter, when usage drops or increases for a specific individual user, when there's 5 users on an account, you can reach out and talk to them, right? But if you have an enterprise account with 1,000 users, you still need to touch those individual users when usage drops. Maybe there's an email that says, hey, you come back into your platform, or you see the A, B, and C feature might be helpful for you. And that's tech. You can't have the account manager CSM reach out to 50 different users out of 1,000 because their usage is dropping, because then you don't have time to do the value driving work they need to do. So there's a lot of instances, but you need to understand your customer base, your specific customer and segmentation there, and then understand that journey that they take, both as a customer, but also individuals within that journey.
Yeah. I feel like that's a whole other podcast we can go into and talking about the structure of tech touch. But one quick follow-up, and then I'll take this in a different direction, is compensation. So you have brought this up as a big topic. It's difficult. It's a touchy subject. And I'm curious, in the world of, let's just take the customer success account management, where they're not owning the account, company's owning the account, but there's distinct incentives for both sides to be aligned to NRR, as you said. So in that world, how did you compensate these two roles? Because that's a big question a lot of folks have. What are the key metrics? How do you attribute what each person did and separate the two roles? Curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, to give some context to the answer as well, I think the first to really think about is how important the compensation model actually is. What I found really the two things that drives what the CSM's account management will do every day is what you speak about from a leadership perspective every single day, and then what you're compensating on, because that's what you're telling them is important, right? So those are two things that indicate to the user, or in this case, the CSM or account manager, what is important for us and what am I going to look at as a leader, as a company, in terms of your performance. So it's something that it's important to pay a lot of attention to. And the second thing I'll also say on the compensation model, before I kind of give my answer, is that especially in CS, where CS impacts a lot of things in the business, if you want to increase your bookings, CS can help doing that by doing bigger or larger or longer contracts. If you want to impact your billings, you need to make sure you're invoicing more upfront and collecting on those invoices. If you want to impact net retention, you make sure that the MRR and ARR is really strong. If you're just doing renewals by count, then you can just renew something for lower value, but you're getting the renewal and you're counting on that. So what you put into the salary model impacts the business. So if there's anything critical as an organization that you feel we need to drive at a certain point in time, you can actually incorporate that within the CS or account management models, and it'll help drive those two different things. So just be super mindful as you're kind of designing compensation models. And I've done that for 15 plus years. How you think about what do I include? How will that actually impact the business? What is the consequence of that? Because there will be good and maybe less good consequences of anything that you put into those models. Now, when it comes to CS, and account management, I would say I always advocate having one or a couple of components that are combined between the two. So that and mostly the best one is the net retention piece. That could be hitting a certain net retention target, you get a bonus. It could be tiered with different steps, of net retention, but just make sure those are aligned, because then there's kind of a common denominator between the two teams that, as a leader, when you speak about it as well, it resonates with both teams, and it kind of actually impacts their work and their pocket in terms of the end of the day compensation. Then I think what you do outside of that really depends on, again, what responsibilities do you want to give the two different teams. So I've had and been part of organizations where we've said account management should only be responsible for expansion and crossing, upselling. CSMs, they're responsible for the renewal piece of it, and then the other work that they're doing. In that scenario, the CSMs need to be compensated on gross retention and probably 2 or 3 leading indicators that will help them drive towards that make them successful. And those could be whatever suits your organization, the segments that you're working towards, and so on and so forth. And account management in that example has the net retention, and then probably some type of upsell or sales, quote unquote, customer sales quota. They can have certain things around maybe ACV or other things that drive a certain behavior. Also, it's still tailored towards when they sell something to a customer, that will be a good thing for them. So I think that's the first thing you want to answer is what are they responsible for? When you know that, and because you can kind of dilute what one or the other is responsible for, depending on how you structure that, then you can fairly easily see what should it be. I tend to think that in most organizations, unless you have a lot of expansion opportunities, a ton, and your churn is really low already from a retention standpoint, having account management do renewals and expansion as part of their job, and CSMs driving value and happiness, as you call it, I love that kind of concept of it, as part of their job. I think that's the best setup personally, and I would have net retention in the middle, have GRR and expansion on the account management side, plus maybe one KPI that's leading. And then on the other side, I would have, a couple of KPIs that are leading indicators that we know drive towards happy renewing customer and expanding customers, and I would help them drive those things.
Your point about mapping to the business model is critical. We hear this all the time on the technology side. That's your product, your technology, your infrastructure, investments, AI, use cases, all have to map to what the business is trying to achieve. But it's no different for your people and the roles and responsibilities. What use cases your AM team should have versus your CS team needs to map to what the business ecosystem is, right? And
100%.
It's there's an example recently this week. I talked to a VP of sales. You think VP of sales, they're focused on new logo acquisition. No, this VP of sales owned retention.
Yeah.
His AEs owned expansion and in account discovery. And the CS team was focused on migrations. They were migrating a legacy product to a new platform that they acquired. So in that world, it's totally different. The CS team is focused on making sure that it's a good, migrations are hellishly long and difficult, especially for enterprise. So that was their job, is make sure the migrations work and we don't lose anybody in the migration process. Well, the actual solution, that's the sales team. So it's fascinating to hear that, because I think that's a great example of mapping to the business needs in the model and indexing the capabilities of your team to align with that.
Yes.
Not every organization is going to have the same framework.
Correct. Yeah. 100%.
Awesome.
It's something that's often missed, especially on the CS side, because it's a little more complex, and leaders don't really understand the full scope of it if you haven't been in CS for a long time. So then you kind of simplify it a little bit, almost too much sometimes, and it's not really aligned with that model that you said, the business model.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I want to switch gears here and talk about another piece of your journey is RevSetter. And you have spoken a lot about CS, which I'm totally in alignment with. Is CS is the revenue engine. It's the next revenue engine for the company, but it needs to be positioned as such, and CEOs need to be viewing the organization as such. So talk to me a little bit about your process. And you mentioned one thing in particular, which was interesting, and that is you don't do the typical kickoff, onboarding, training process at RevSetter. You do something a little bit different, which I think sets up companies for bigger revenue opportunities. So can you talk a bit about that, and what is your process after you close the deal?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very aligned with kind of the way that we see CS plays within the company and within the kind of the future of the company. As you mentioned, we see CS, and I use this broadly as CSMs, account management, you call it post sales, but we see it as the thing that will drive the revenue and the growth of the company long term. And especially if you think about, we work with a lot of SaaS tech companies, a lot of services companies with recurring business models, and for them, their customer base grows, then a majority of their revenue is coming from the customer base. So that's a really important part of them to hone and utilize and do something with. So the one thing that we also have seen a lot, and I've seen a lot over the years from my advisor kind of role and being in the space for so long, is especially for scaling organizations, you go from being a startup to a growth stage company, and then now you're scaling towards that mid-market and up. And when you come in, what we've seen a lot is what you do with the technology itself is great and can aid in what you kind of trying to do. But the way that you are successful is if you have a holistic approach to how you're doing everything from a CS perspective. So how are you structuring your CS organization? What are the goals and KPIs and things that you're measuring, and why? And are they aligned with your overall business goals? And then what is the technology and the systems like RevSetter that you're using to support that overall strategy? And we found pretty early that a lot of companies come in and they don't have that thought through. They haven't maybe asked themselves all the right questions. They don't know all the best practices, or they haven't gone through a phase before where they're growing from 10 to 15 to 20 CSMs or account managers, or from 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 million to 100 million as a very different ballpark when it comes to how you run a CS organization. And as someone myself that's ran and seen organizations from 15, 20 million ARR, 15, 20 people in CS to, 500 million and more, and a couple hundred people. It's every stage is very different, and the strategy that you need to employ and how you do it is different. So what we started doing at RevSetter is when we have a new customer on board, we potentially kind of built our platform in a way so the actual setup and training is really easy. It's very kind of intuitive, because what we wanted to do is in the beginning we do what we call a CS audit. So we have a process that we go through, it's a framework that we go through with our customers, where we discuss a lot of things around their strategy, around their goals. We help them kind of ask the right question, think about the right things. And what comes out of that audit, and for some customers, it's 2 sessions, 2 hours, 3 hours in total that we spend and work with them through that process. For some, they have a lot of things, a big organization, a lot of things to think about. We maybe do that for a week where we help them go on site or what have you. But usually what comes out of that is really their entire strategy. Okay, this is what we're trying to accomplish. This is where we are today, current state. This is where we want to be. Here's the gap in between. Here's the path. And then when we have all that, setting up a system or helping them with how they should be thinking about it from a methodology standpoint, or tech touch versus high touch, becomes really easy, because now they have a clear plan, understanding what they're trying to accomplish and why, not just with the tool that we're selling them, but really with their CS organization. And we can help support them in that through our technology, of course, but also outside of that. So that process is really helpful for our customers, and something that a lot of them struggle with. It's very interesting to see, they come in, because they've used a Gainsight or something in the past or not. The strategy is still a little bit lacking, and that's why they're kind of trying to get that next level.
That is I'm sure that a lot of people, when they hear that, will be like, wow, I need to probably audit myself and reflect on what we need, because I feel like you could have a whole other business model just to do audits as a service, and maybe that's why
exactly.
People, I feel like this is a theme I've been talking about a lot and hearing a lot of people discuss is, for the past 15, 20 years, sales has become a very processized, scalable, standard playbook for what you should do. And now you have MedPick, you have Challenger, you have different frameworks, winning by design, et cetera. On the post-sales side, there's not a lot of that. There are folks who are creating ideas and frameworks, but it's still so nascent and young. So I think these audits and how you're approaching it is very smart, and a lot of people get value out of that. Great. So switching gears again here, and I want to do a rapid fire series of questions. So these are questions that are on the top of minds of our audience, and there's always points of conversation. So I'm going to go through. What I want you to do here is respond each of these questions within 1 or 2 words. Some might take 3 or 4 words, but minimum words as possible. And first thought that comes to mind. Does that work?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, great. So first one, best metric of success for CS.
Net revenue retention, NRR.
Awesome. A lot of agreement there, I'm sure, with folks. What about the worst metric of success for CS?
NPS. I know that will be controversial. NPS.
Yes. I'm on team cancel NPS. So again, we're aligned there. Most underrated part of customer success.
think the impact that it can and will have on the growth of the overall business.
What about the most overrated part of CS?
How complex CS is.
That's an interesting one. Maybe your audits will help simplify it. What is the current state of CS?
I would say moving from success to revenue.
All right, like it. What about the future of CS?
It's yeah, we talked about it will be the revenue engine of businesses out there.
All right. And then last two here, best CS book or podcast?
There's a ton. I'll say the customer success channel I like. They have a lot of good content on that podcast.
Okay, awesome. Check that one out. And then what is the best community for CS leaders?
I'll have to go with the customer success forum. A lot of people have good content.
Okay, great. Awesome. Well, I want to end this on a final question here, and I ask all of our guests this, and our audience loves to hear about it, which is, if you could make one prediction on the future of customer success, what's going to happen?
So I think customer success is gonna morph into and evolve into the revenue organization. It's gonna be the critical part of it, reporting up to the revenue leader, being geared towards revenue goals of the company, which will also include sales and marketing and some additional functions. And what I'll also say, what I think of the CS role is, if you're in CS today, and as this transition is going to happen, I think the next CRO of a company will come from CS instead of sales. And I think the next CEO of a company will come from CS and instead of sales, because that's where the majority of the revenue will be. That's the organization that will be the closest to the customers, the most important asset of the company, along with the employees. And that's where I think the future will be headed. So that's a good place to be.
Yes, I could not agree more. I love the fact that you said the future CEOs will come from CS. Very much on board with that. That's what we were trying to accomplish with the industry here with Foresight as well. And that's the future, right? Because the more you understand your customer, the more you can be dialed into the industry needs. Of course, that's going to become the future leader of the organization. So let's both make that a reality. Help our CSMs become CEOs. I feel like that'll, if we can make that happen, we're doing well.
Absolutely. I truly, that's the way we're headed for the future here. So that'll be interesting and a cool thing to see as that starts materializing.
100%. Cool. Haydar, this was a pleasure. Thank you so much for spending some time with me on the podcast. I'm excited for this to be released to the audience, and thank you for all your thoughts.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a blast chatting, and yeah, I look forward to seeing this out there.